Bitcoiners, and welcome to a very special Friday edition of the Blockchain Report. I'm Hank Hudson, coming to you live from San Francisco, where the only thing more inflated than the rent is the national debt clock Jim Cramer just discovered. It's Friday, thank the good Lord Satoshi, the day you realize your portfolio survived another week, even if your liver didn't. But hey, don't worry, today's show is stacked tighter than a sailor buy order. We've got an interview with Jeremy Allman, CEO of Pasando, the guy trying to rip out the Visa rails and replace them with something that doesn't cost you $3 for a cup of coffee. Then I'm sitting down with Stephen Lubka, VP of Investor Relations at Nakamoto, because when your job title literally has relations in it, you better know how to explain why Bitcoin's not going to zero. We'll also be joined by Morgan Rochard, bringing her own insights into how institutions are circling Bitcoin like frat boys around a keg. And then to top it all off, we're talking to Piotr Bedkowski from Zappo Bank about whether Bitcoin officially buries gold by 2030. And spoiler alert, it does, because nobody's lugging gold bars through TSA when you can move billions in Bitcoin with 12 words in your noggin. So buckle in. Well, actually, don't buckle in. This is Bitcoin. The roller coaster doesn't come with seatbelts. And make sure you also smash that like button and subscribe like it owes you gas fees, and follow RoxomTV and me at Hank at RoxomTV on all platforms that matter. Now, let's kick off today's special show. Let's go. All right, today we are joined for our deep dive in studio by a guest who's not just talking about fixing money, he's actually building the rails to make it happen. He's the founder and CEO of Pasando, the largest Bitcoin blockchain-enabled B2B payments network, moving over $12 billion across 1 million payers, all while pushing for a world where economic freedom is the default. He's an engineer, a surfer, a hacker, a sailor, and today he's here to show us how software, money, and mission collide to change the future of finance. Let's give a big Blockchain Report welcome to Jeremy Allman, everybody. Jeremy! What a reception. They love you, and we love that you're here. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Hank, glad to be here, man. What an honor to be with you.
Well, the honor is ours. We're super pumped to have you in the studio today. You've got this really interesting background, and we're going to get into that and Pasando and so much more. But before we do, you, my friend, took a late flight. You got in from New York. You're at the UN General Assembly, orange pilling the world. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it was really strange. You know, I'm just a business guy, so to be in front of policymakers, really talking about Bitcoin for the first time to nation-state leaders to discuss not just blockchain, not just stable coins, but by why Bitcoin is a tool for freedom around the world was a lot of fun, and hopefully I opened up some eyes and ears to the movement that's changing the world.
Yeah, well, you know, as we've seen with Bitcoin, once people take the time to educate themselves or be educated by someone else, they usually tend to come around. And what did you feel like the temperature in the room was like when you were there? I think that's what everyone's wanting to know.
Yeah, you know, I've been in the space a long time, and I would say that for over a decade, it was very difficult to say the word Bitcoin in those halls. You could say blockchain, you could talk about decentralized finance, but in those halls, Bitcoin was the word not to be uttered. And you know, I think what's happened is really we've crossed the chasm over the last year. You have nation-state leaders, you have the strategic reserve, you have new policies that have come out, and you also have countries around the world, whether it's El Salvador or other places in the global south, that are highly embracing it. And so I think finally, you have a receptive audience to want to hear, what does Bitcoin mean actually in the real world, not just number go up, but how does it change cultures and society?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with what we've seen this year, these developments, the regulatory clarity, we're seeing the institutional adoption, it certainly seems like we're experiencing a very different era of Bitcoin's journey. And while you were there, you kind of mentioned that initially Bitcoin was kind of like Voldemort. You weren't supposed to say it out loud. But do you feel like now bigger players, the governments, institutions in the space are kind of feeling like they've been granted permission almost to explore Bitcoin more now than before?
Yeah, I think you have two things that are happening at the same time. You have a top-down piece, which is happening from the leader and policy side. That's generally around store of value. So, you know, when the largest asset managers in the world are, you know, onboarding Bitcoin, when the president of the largest, most important nation in the world is talking about Bitcoin, you know, it's hard to, sort of deny it. At the same time, the part that I talked a lot about, particularly at the UN, was around the grassroots efforts. I think the piece that people miss is in the global south, in the bottom of the pyramid, Bitcoin is growing faster than the internet did, and it's growing faster in use cases. So we talked about the Bitcoin circular economies, how the Bitcoin circular economies in places like El Salvador, Guatemala, Peru, Africa, Afghanistan are being used as tools for freedom money, and they're growing faster than the internet. And I think that was very eye-opening.
Yeah, absolutely. And what did you notice in terms of, right now, Bitcoin is at this interesting point, right? Because it means different things to people in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
So you have like South America, it is a necessary tool to protect their value and their money. But here in the United States, with us having the world reserve currency for some time, that hasn't been the case. So do you see people, like policymakers, kind of tuning into the fact that like, hey, that's starting to happen at home now too, and we need to figure out a solution before we become a South American country in the same idea, right?
Yeah, leadership is about being in front of where the puck is going.
Right.
You know, and so do you want to be in front of the internet and the transformation that happened? The US was, Silicon Valley, which is where we are at right now, was at the front of the transformation. You don't want to be left behind. You know, and the reality was we were left behind for the last few years, largely in this industry. You know, my day job, Paystand.com, is a B2B payment network. We service critical industry all across the US, and so we were fortunate to not have quite as much difficulty with the regulators as other of my colleagues that were working in Bitcoin did. But even still, it was very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And you know, I think over the last year, you're seeing changes happen in the policy side in the US. And where the US leads, other places follow. So what I experienced at the UN was a number of nation state leaders are looking and comparing the US policy to, let's say, an El Salvador policy, to a deregulated policy altogether. And they're comparing all of those. And so I think the dominoes are falling. But the other part I'm really passionate about is, not only is that happening from the top down, but Bitcoin really is a decentralized grassroots movement. That's what it started as. And so my belief is, the actual real world use cases are what's going to drive the change, because that will push constituents and that will push leaders to see what are their people doing. Because if their people are using Bitcoin, they have to listen to it.
Right.
And so, when hundreds of millions of people around the globe are using Bitcoin, you start to have to pay attention to it. And so it remains a bottom-up movement. It remains very important for people to use it, because when it is used, you cannot ignore it.
Right, and we're really reaching that point, not just by number alone, but use case, it's becoming too big to ignore.
Yeah.
And you're in a unique position as one of the leaders in this space right now. What is it like having to, I don't know, I want to say convince, but explain Bitcoin to people that are still new to it? Because we all have what we like to call our orange pill moment.
Yeah.
Right? So for you, when was that, and how do you communicate Bitcoin's value to people who are just beginning to have their own moment?
Yeah, so it's a longer story on my side, but I've been in Bitcoin for over a dozen years. I came out of Occupy Wall Street in the very early days of Bitcoin. And so my moment was a very philosophical and revolutionary moment. And everybody comes to Bitcoin in their own way. What I've learned over the years is it used to be frustrating for me to talk to people about the merits of Bitcoin. You watch people listen and then their eyes kind of glaze over. And so I've learned that there are two things that, at least for me, are very helpful. One, you really need to talk about the use cases and the value it unlocks. Sure. So on the business side, which is where I spend most of my time, I actually don't spend a ton of my time in the Bitcoin community, even though this is why my personal passion exists.
Right.
But I spend time talking to business leaders about, geez, wouldn't it be nice if your money moved at the speed of light in a completely automated, intelligent way, so you could scale faster and at extremely low cost. A business leader understands that because that has bottom line impact.
Right.
So I'll use the values of Bitcoin before I say the word Bitcoin. That's quite often. And then the second thing I've learned, which we also do something very unique, which is we take people down to circular economies in the global south a lot. And one of the reasons why we do that is, what I've realized is, until you see and touch and feel Bitcoin, it still feels like a concept. But the moment that you walk through a town that's 100% using Bitcoin, you're buying your pupusas with it, she's buying like the milk from the goat person, you really can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah.
It's a magic moment. The same way the first time time you walked into an Uber, a few years ago, and you're used to exchanging money with the taxi driver and waiting for the thing, and it just automatically comes, and then you automatically leave, and you don't pay anybody anymore. Like, that's a magic moment.
Right.
And Bitcoin is a magic moment. It just turns out that most people actually haven't felt that magic moment yet.
Right. And I got to say, I'm shocked I haven't really heard anyone approach explaining Bitcoin to people the way you have. And I think it's really smart in creating that magic moment, right? Because it's like if I were to tell you, hey, it's a hard cap, I can send it anywhere instantaneously in the world, it's way cheaper. What am I talking about? I'd be like, I don't know, what is it? Tell me. But then people hear Bitcoin, like you said, and their eyes kind of glaze over. Oh, it's another one of those guys talking about Bitcoin. At what point did you kind of realize this was the best way to go about onboarding new people, by telling them the benefits first and then dropping that it was Bitcoin on them later?
Well, my belief is Bitcoin is built for the 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
And it's built in different ways. So if you're at the top of the pyramid, it can be about economic unlock. And if you're at the bottom of the pyramid, it really is freedom money and a tool for transformation. And so, if you go to someone and you just try to describe economic theory or computer science theory, I'm a computer science background, what you realize is that's just not mainstream. And so describing the 3 properties of money, all of the things, people's eyes glaze back. In fact, if you're a listener right now, unless you're a super hardcore Bitcoiner, you probably already are bored, right? On the other hand, if you go to them and you give them ways where it changes their life and is meaningful, that's important. And I think the store of value, the number go up part is how a lot of people start.
Sure.
But it's sort of like, if you had a house and your house starts appreciating, Saylor and other people talk about it as property. That's true. But if you don't use the house, it's an investment asset, but the house is useful. Like I'd like to have shelter in my house, and I'd like to build a family in my house. These are useful properties of the house.
Right.
So Bitcoin is like the strange thing sometimes where people only talk about the land or property value and number go up. But it'd be like if I gave you the house and said, hey, that house is going to be valuable for you, but also you should live in it.
Yeah.
You should use it.
Yeah.
And then people use it and they go, I think houses are pretty important.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I can't live in a gold house. I don't have enough gold for that.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And what I was interested specifically about having you on the show today was I always love to kind of hear what the origin stories are for people as to why they view the world and what are the tools they're building to kind of help fulfill that vision. And when I was doing my due diligences on you, I saw that you said in 2008, the whole financial crisis tended to hit pretty close to home for you.
Yeah.
So how much of your current venture, Paystand, was born out of the frustration of what you experienced back in 2008? Was that in any way related to the path that you're on now?
Yeah, so just a background for everyone. My day job is Paystand.com, which is a business-to-business payment network. We are the largest and fastest growing company that's built on the Bitcoin blockchain. We service large enterprise companies generally. But when people say Bitcoin's not used, today on our platform, about 1 million businesses use us.
Oh, wow.
We are about 20 billion in payment volume at this point, about 2% of all US commercial account-to-account payments. So we're of some size and scale, and we've been building the company for a while. But I didn't get in this for just to go build a tech company. The reason why I got involved is they say oftentimes when you start a company, what's important is you want it to be a combination of what your professional experience is and your personal experience. In my professional experience, I'd spent a lot of time in enterprise and tech, but on the personal side, I think I'm a product of America. My mother's family was refugees that came from Mexico. They worked on the border. They worked in the mines and in the fields. My father was a blue-collar construction worker, white guy, but he never went to high school, never went to college, and so they lived a very, very meager life. Like most Americans, and truly I think all throughout the globe, what you really want is a better life for your children.
Of course. Yeah.
And when you want a better life for your children, really it's 2 things. One, access to education so they can do better, right? That's economic empowerment.
Right.
And then ultimately for yourself, if you work hard, you should be able to grow your own pie.
Right.
And so for me, I got involved in tech early. I was involved in the dot-com days in the late 90s. I was involved in a startup, and so my life went well. My parents, on the other hand, spent 20 years basically working, kind of minimum wage type jobs to be able to buy an 800 square foot house. The American dream, though. That was important to them. They grew their wealth by being in that little house over 20 years. Tragedy then, 20 years later, hits the family, and it happened to be at bad luck during 2008. Now, 2008 was what we now know in the history books as the Great Financial Crisis. The banks, basically because of problems with the way that they did loans in the real estate market, a number of the most systemically important banks failed. And when they failed, they took out millions of Americans like my family. And my family actually lost that house. So that sucks.
Yeah.
Sucks.
Yeah.
But I think a wider thing came out of it. So out of it, I was working in New York at the time in tech. And what happened was I was literally working, doing a tech job at a big bank. And I watched this thing called Occupy Wall Street. Now, Occupy Wall Street was a series of people that did a protest that said, it's not fair that the government bailed out the banks, that the banks were too big to fail, but Main Street was left out.
Right.
And so you literally had groups of people that were sitting at the front of the banks, camped out, throwing rocks at.
I remember that. Yeah.
It was a wild time.
So you were throwing rocks at the banks?
Well, I had this very wild experience where I was walking in, and in my life it had changed because of tech. But who was I? You know, the son of the immigrant and the son of the blue-collar construction worker that were throwing rocks at the bank, or the person who was involved in technology who's now working at the bank.
Oh.
And so this was kind of a deep moment for me. And so what I ended up doing was I believe what technology is this moment for us to be able to imagine the world not as it is, but as it could be, and then go make it so.
Yeah.
And so I quit the job there. And I joined the movement, but I joined the movement not in a way to throw rocks, but I think, you know, Bitcoin is a quiet revolution. And so what my piece of the story is I went back and did my master thesis on why banks weren't too big to fail. And very early on in the process, late 2009, while I was writing the master's thesis, I discovered the white paper. And what I discovered during that white paper was this transformational technology that could open up the financial system and avoid problems like what happened during Occupy Wall Street and the Great Financial Crisis, but more broadly, whether it's about inflation and erosion of our money, or the access to the other 7 billion people on the planet, or simply making it so businesses could have better economics so they could be better, more competitive, and create more GDP. And so that was the genesis of Paystand, because my view at the early days of Bitcoin was, Bitcoin is great, but we need to see it used in the real world with real use cases. And so we wanted to build a business that created a real use case that could go to the UN, to the largest companies, and to the smallest villages and say, this is meaningful and important and impactful to you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think this would be very Gandhi approved, is to be the change, right, you want to see in the world. And so you're at Paystand now, and I want to talk a little bit more about that, actually a lot more. You kind of touched on what it does, but I think a big hurdle in this space right now, and we're still seeing it, is accessibility to the masses. People don't get it. It's financial stuff. That's not for me. Bitcoin, the internet, what? Like, I don't get it. So I need you to do me a favor here. Can you explain Paystand to me like you're explaining it to my Mima?
Yeah.
Who is it for? What does it do? What are the benefits?
Yeah, so Paystand as a company, we service medium to large enterprises all over the US and globally. And what we do is you can imagine it like a Venmo or PayPal for them. Now, why do those kind of companies not use Venmo or PayPal? Well, first, they're large, so they have large financial systems, so they need to integrate. Second, whether it's Visa or Mastercard or PayPal or the Federal Reserve, they charge fees. So those fees can be quite expensive. So when a business actually gets paid in the US, this is kind of a crazy stat, but the business gets paid on average, about 50% of their payments are paid in paper check. Which I don't know, when was the last time you did a paper check?
Years. Yeah.
So consumers, we don't use them.
No.
But in commercial, it's still used.
Okay.
And then the second largest, the vast remaining payments over businesses are done through wires or ACH, which were all built before the internet.
Right.
Okay. And then you have Visa and Mastercard, which are basically a cartel that charge 3% for every transaction that goes through their system. Yeah. And you know, if I was getting charged 3% on my $5 cup of coffee, maybe that's okay. But the clients I serve, these are large clients that they might be sending a $100,000 invoice for a manufacturing good. Or they might be, you know, a systemically important farm in Iowa where the grocery store is buying corn from them. You're not going to put a $100,000 order over Visa and MasterCard, so those jerks can take 3%, $3,000.
Yeah.
So that's why these commercial companies still live in paper checks, is they have nowhere to go. And so we don't describe to them, Bitcoin is sound money. What we say is, hey, you should be able to get paid in your revenue, which is the lifeblood of your business. You should be able to send out an invoice and the customer should pay you and then you should get all of your money. That's a crazy, weird concept.
Who would think?
Who would think, like we've done for the last 10,000 years, is when you buy goods and services, whether it's with barter or gold or seashells, you got all of it, not a piece of it. And so what Paystand does is we enable the technology and infrastructure for those companies to get paid and to pay in an instant and automatic and no fee kind of way. And that put millions of dollars of bottom line back on the customer.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I remember just like transferring money is a total scam. I was in Cambodia a couple years ago. I lost my debit card. I didn't have access to money. My family had to wire me money through Western Union or something. And they took like $150 of it.
It's crazy.
It was crazy, just for like a couple grand. It was nuts. So I guess my question is, why do you think the industry, for the most part, has been so stuck in the Stone Age when consumer payments got shiny apps years ago? What is the void you guys are filling right now?
Yeah, it takes a while for large companies because when you think about the money flow, it's the most important part of a business. So it's the slowest to adopt. And I also think technology needs to be radically better. And so in our view, a lot of fintech companies that aren't building on-chain solutions, they're just slightly better. They're cool UIs, but at the end of the day, they're built on just traditional banking services.
Right.
So what we want to do is create something that's radically better, radically faster, radically cheaper. And then we want to make it accessible. So I'll give you an example of an accessible product that we have that lots and lots of businesses use. So we have a spend card. And that spend card, you spend in dollars, but then as a company, you earn in sats.
Oh, okay.
Some of you might be familiar of consumer versions of that. So, great companies like Gemini or Coinbase or Fold have a consumer card where you can do that. But companies, when you have hundreds of employees, we have about 450 employees. I can't give them all consumer cards. I need them when they go to travel or buy ads or whatever they're going to do. They need to align that with the budget. It needs to be connected to the financial software. And so we have our spend card is connected to the corporate, connected to your budget, is all automatic and agentic and uses AI so it can tell, are you spending it on the right thing?
Nice.
Then you can spend dollars, but then the company or the person can earn sats, which is oftentimes one of the first ways we can onboard them into Bitcoin Treasury, which is pretty cool.
I was gonna say, if you have a million people using this or businesses, how is that? Have any of the companies that you work with transitioned to their own Bitcoin strategy, maybe as a result of earning sats through your company?
Yeah, so one of the more interesting things of our approach is, unlike some of the treasury companies where they go first to treasury, in my experience with that, and I think some of them are doing a very good job educating the market, but if you think about it, the CFO's job is capital preservation. And then they have to go, if you're a public company, you have to go to the boards to be able to convince them to take this crazy internet money, right? That's a pretty complicated thing to be able to convince a public company's board, audit committee, CFO. And so I'm always happy to see more Bitcoin education, but we also think that's a hard starting place, even if it's a valid starting place. And so what we do is our products or services, we'll start where they either may not know that they're using Bitcoin. So when you're getting paid through our product, you may not even first know. You just know you save a lot of money, and then you start using the infrastructure and you go, how did I get all this? How did I get this money back? And then when we say, well, it's through the blockchain built on this thing called Bitcoin that's decentralized. Or we might give them the card, and then their card, all of a sudden they start earning. And again, it's very simple. So instead of Amex points, which they're used to, or their corporate spend card points, which who knows what those mean? Like I have Amex points. I have no idea when I have 13,000 Amex points what it means. So we're able to go, hey, we just gave you points on our corporate card. And instead of them becoming worthless over time, they actually become more valuable over time.
Sounds great.
It's easy because, if you think about it, they didn't have to go do this Bitcoin Treasury strategy that they had to convince their board or their audit. They got it effectively for free by doing what they already are doing. And then you start onboarding them and they start learning about this digital asset that's hard money, and that becomes one of the first real cases where they go, well, now I have Bitcoin on the balance sheet, now what do I do?
Right. I mean, you and your business might be one of the biggest onboarders, intentionally or not, of new Bitcoiners in the space, just because that seems how it goes, right? Like somebody gets a little bit of Bitcoin, they were like, oh, I only put $20 in here, now it's 30. And then they keep doing it, and then it becomes fun, and then you end up doing the research, going down the rabbit hole and seeing how Bitcoin can work for you. And what's really neat about your business is you can earn Bitcoin or sats right through these purchases, but you also run Paystand on a Bitcoin infrastructure.
Yeah.
So can you walk us through what that actually means?
Yeah. So again, we've been quiet in the space for a long time, and we think our role in the space was to prove that we could build a business that actually scaled on Bitcoin. In the early days, everyone would say things like, they would ask, what chain are you on? And then they'd sort of infer, like, Bitcoin doesn't scale. And so we had to build a lot of things to actually prove that it was scalable. I kind of liken it to, Amazon had to go build an e-commerce company, but they had to go prove in the early days that it was better than a bookstore, it was cheaper, better, and faster than Barnes & Noble. And they also had to go and say, well, what happens on Black Friday if 1 million people show up to the website? Right. In the 1999, that was actually a hard problem to solve. And so in our case, we did the same. And so we built our own layer 2 that sits on top of Bitcoin. And what happens there is we needed to be able to move secure money between two big companies in a way that was both secure, auditable, open, but private, and scaled. And so, we built our own version of something that's kind of similar to Lightning, but it terminates in dollars at the end of the day, or pesos, but then pegs to the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's a very unique solution. Yeah. But that's just one of many solutions. So whether it's our product and services, our network that do that, or whether it's our corporate spend card, or we have a mining and infrastructure business where we actually make sure that we're helping the network be decentralized, our view was to be a quiet player in the space that actually helped grow the network.
Yeah, well, quiet player or not, I think what you're doing here, this could be a really disruptive force in the payment industry, right? So it begs the question for me, how big are the stakes here? I mean, B2B payment markets, you're trying to unseat, Visa, Mastercard, and the banking cartel. Where do you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity to build, these giant category companies that really eat financial services.
Yeah.
I think Andreessen says it one way in Silicon Valley, which is software ate the world. And then all of Silicon Valley right now is, I think, enamored with AI. And I think that's really important. The transformation of labor is one of the most important things that is happening, in our lifetime. But I think there's something else that's equally important, which is the transformation of money is the most foundational thing to our economy and commerce in 10,000 years. Right. And actually, Silicon Valley isn't paying as much attention to that. And so my view is these companies that eat Wall Street, hopefully in a more responsible way, will become the winners of the next era. And my hope is that we actually build a financial system that's not only just different companies, but better kinds of companies. Right. So just to give you some numbers, commercial, which I work in, it's about $18 trillion in the US alone. On the B2B side, which is kind of boring and not a lot of people interact with B2B, but it's actually bigger than consumer. It's the largest part of the US GDP. Oh. Because if you're moving large supply chain and manufacturing, or you're moving energy or farm goods, these are all things that actually create real production in our economy. Yeah. And boy, wouldn't that be cool if it was all running on the Bitcoin infrastructure?
Yeah, no, that would be. And you make some really good points. Right now, AI is kind of the shiny thing everybody's looking at. But that was it's different though, right? Because it's something that didn't exist really and now is going to exist when money has been around forever. So you're really redoing the architecture of something that's been around for 10,000 years. Yeah. And that's a big deal. And so today, who's your customer? Is it Fortune 500s who are saving millions? Is it more mid-sized companies? Who does this work for? Or is it kind of for everybody?
Yeah, it is across the board. So it could be large companies. So it could be everybody from Motorola on the manufacturing side to Anheuser-Busch on the supply chain side, or it could be big farms in Iowa that are corn farms, or it could energy producers. We service 7 of the 10 largest renewable energy producers in the U.S. Oh, wow. So these are systemically important companies to the industry. But then the other way to think of it is those large companies we service, they are the supply chain is serviced by small businesses that service them. So it could be parts and accessories that are servicing those companies. It could be grocery stores or distributors that are buying from them. And so we think that is all really, really important. So just as, I think great wallet companies are onboarding hundreds of millions of people around the world to freedom money and access to financial services, we're just doing the same on the business side.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that. And you've talked about, I was looking into you again, but I do my due diligence before you come, and you talk about something called the journey to zero. So 0 fees, 0 touch, 0 time, 0 walls. Can you unpack that for us a little bit and what that means to you?
Yeah, so for a CFO that we'll work with or CEO of a company, basically the cost of money is actually a really important part of their business.
Yeah.
So if you're building something and you're a manufacturing company, you might the widgets to make them, and you might have 20% margins, meaning for every $100 you might make 20% of your profits. But then if the banks are going to charge 3, 4, 5%, that really eats into your profits. So that's a cost.
Right.
And we want to take that to zero.
Wow.
Also, if you have people that are really involved in the process, so this is the AI agentic side, we'll deal with companies that have, oftentimes dozens, if not hundreds of people that are working in the back office on the finance and operations side. But all that's programmable. So one of the cool properties of Bitcoin is it's digital money, which means it's programmable. And so if we can automate that work for them, that can save massive amounts of labor savings. So the people can go back to doing the knowledge work instead of the manual work.
Yeah.
So zero touch. So automated, and then the last one, so zero fees, zero touch, zero time. Time is money.
Yeah.
And so if a company, it takes 30 days to get paid, that slows down the entire operation. So you might send out an invoice, you might be waiting for a check or a wire in the bank. And that means if you want to run the business faster, you actually have to borrow money. And borrowing money is very expensive. We can describe like how we feel about banks and lending and all of that stuff, but it's very expensive. And so if the company can get their money fast, in fact, in zero time, at the speed of light, that means you have less to borrow because you have more of your capital today to be able to deploy so your business can run faster.
So not only would a client of yours necessarily be saving on like the 3% fee they might incur from Visa, they're saving time, they're saving touch points. Like, how much savings does a company get, all things told? It sounds like it's a lot more than just the 3% you would get, by not using Visa.
Yeah, so on average on our AR business, which helps you receive the money, we cut their costs in half, which is huge.
Yeah.
And then over the course of the lifetime, we'll cut a cost by 70%. So this is where we say like technology should be 10x better. So that's 10x better than something like Visa or the wires. And then on the same time on our spend card, so on our team pay product, which you spend dollars, earn sats, we will oftentimes cut budgets by 20 or 30% just by excess costs, excess spending, more visibility. So these are just really practical tools for a company to use. They might be boring, but they're practical, and if it's practical, it's to the bottom line, which means companies can hire more and they can be more competitive, which I think is really important in our economy.
Yeah, I mean, competition's kind of the bedrock of capitalism, right? And that's what we're here for here in the United States. And, Visa and Mastercard have kind of owned the rails now for decades. So why haven't they been disrupted already? And do you think Paystand has a real shot at coming at the king's throne with that, with this, which you guys are doing?
Well, I think these things tend to work like monopolies. So technology will build monopolies, and that's really what's happened with Visa and Mastercard and financial services. And do I think it's just Paystand? No, actually, I don't. The reason why I'm such a big believer in the Bitcoin blockchain specifically, not just blockchains or digital assets in particular, is my belief is the way that you actually dethrone cartels is through open wins. So we know this from history. There was, when the revolution of the internet started, there was this thing called AOL or CompuServe. They were private versions of the internet. And then a bunch of hackers, and I mean that in the good way, and cryptographists and technologists pushed for open. And so the open internet beat a private owned internet. And so my belief is the way you take these guys out is not just going from one monopoly to another, which is, I think, a lot of Wall Street's way today.
Right.
I want to go the other way and say, no, we're all part of one big movement to build a one network that is open public infrastructure. And so we're all part of that movement. So we're going to play a role, which is on the business side. You're going to play a role on the media side. Each one of you that is watching is playing a role by participating in the Bitcoin blockchain. And consumer companies are playing a role by doing payments. And part of my heart, on the paystand.org is playing a role by helping these Bitcoin circular economies for the other 7 billion people on the planet. That's a movement that you cannot actually fight against, because when it's against 7 or 8 billion people on the planet, I don't care if you're a cartel, you can't fight that.
Wow, the Occupy Wall Street-ness of you from 2008-9 is really coming through. I love the passion. That's incredible. And, as you're growing, of course, you are going to acquire other companies. I saw recently that you guys acquired TeamPay. What was that about? Is that about adding features, growing your customer base, or are you just kind of doing the thing because you guys are scaling and they seem like they would add to your infrastructure?
Yeah, so we're growing a lot, which is, we feel very blessed and honored to be a company that's, at size and scale now. So, for many years, we didn't talk about the infrastructure a lot because we really wanted to go prove that there were real customers using it. And now that we're at size and scale, one of the things we've learned is when we have the honor to work with these companies, there's more things we can do with them because if we're helping them save so much money, we have the ability to go in and say, hey, Bitcoin as a native infrastructure and open blockchain infrastructure not only can save you money, but it can help you supercharge your business. It can help you supercharge your teams. So in that case, when a customer uses us on the AR side to receive their money, now we'll come in and say, well, you should pay now with our products too. You can pay cross-border. You can buy your goods and services internationally. You don't have to pay FX rates or cross-border rates anymore.
Yeah.
So these are all really, really cool ways for us to help them and expect us to do more of that.
Yeah, and as you're developing all of these new ways to utilize the rails, Bitcoin's infrastructure, it seems like how could anybody argue against this not being a better system? So when you're talking to these kind of old-timey, stodgy CFOs, like, what are you saying to get them to help ditch their bank wires and invest in a more of a Bitcoin-backed future?
Honestly, the way you talk to that crew, and everybody has a different entry point.
Sure.
But when you talk to a CFO of a large company, their entire job is capital preservation and the ability for the company to be more competitive on the finance side. So you talk to them about a bottom line. So if their bottom line of their costs for a $100 million company is it costs them, $1 million, $2 million to deal with that old school financial infrastructure, and you can save them $1 million, they become orange pilled that way. It's a very, and here's the thing, that sounds very, sort of capitalistic in the scary capital C way, but maybe I'll bring it back to the heart, which is, I believe one of the main things that makes Bitcoin so special is its incentive alignment. It's game theory played out in economics.
Right.
So it's not zero-sum game, which is how the financial system works today. Like a lot of my master's thesis and pre-work that I did coming into Bitcoin was the financial system really is a zero-sum thing. The best win, the most accumulate to the top, the 1%, the monopolies become more powerful. And what Bitcoin is to say this incentive alignment, which is if I win, you win, because if we're on open and public infrastructure, the costs go down.
Right.
My friend Jeff Booth says it this way. He talks a lot about deflation, right? Technology should actually make costs go down, not up, but that's not how our life works, but that's how technology and economics should work.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do is show Bitcoin does work that way in the real world for companies and people alike.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing examples of that with each passing day. And, so with Paystand, I was reading you guys have raised quite a bit of money to make your operations go. And when you're talking to investors, how do you filter out investors that are just chasing that quick hype, that quick buck, from those that actually are buying into what your vision is for Bitcoin now and how it's going to be used in the future?
Yeah, I think I've been in tech for a while, and I've been fortunate. I've been part of a few startups that have been quite successful. And so one of my learnings is, and this is true in business, is who you work with and who you partner with matters more than just about anything.
Yeah.
Because these things take a long time. Paystand's been building this company for well over a dozen years, so they take time. So you want people that you can lock arms with that are aligned with the long-term vision.
Right.
Yes, economics and incentives is. You want them to be financially successful,
right,
but you also want to be moving towards something that you both believe in, shared North Star vision. So ours is economic empowerment.
Yeah.
And so we chose to work principally with less, what you might call crypto type investors, which I felt were very hypey, and I think had a hard time, particularly in some of the earlier bubbles, differentiating between why Bitcoin blockchain was unique and other tokenization. And so we chose instead to work with principally with folks that had built really, really well-known financial service companies. So the folks that had built PayPal and Visa and Mastercard. And then we chose to say, find the ones there that had been highly successful and then go, do you believe in the Bitcoin blockchain? So for example, one of our early investors was the first person in Wall Street to actually write a white paper about Bitcoin in 2010 from Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs is a storied, Wall Street firm, and the CEO nearly kicked him out because he kind of did it under the radar, but it went so viral, and this is like 2010.
Yeah.
It went so viral that he had to basically get hired back. He was the lead fintech analyst. He covered PayPal, he covered all the big fintech companies, and then he's talked about this crazy thing called Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so people like that are the people we want to be aligned with, because we know that they know the industry, they know how to build great transformational companies, but they're also aligned with where we believe the industry should go.
Yeah, I love that. It actually reminds me a lot of the movie Jerry Maguire. He has this late night manifesto he writes, and it's the truth, but they didn't want to hear it, so they didn't hire him back, but it sounds like this guy was, which is glad to hear it. So you talked about bubbles, but I want to talk about the cycles. As you're onboarding clients to this, right, and they're new to the space, Bitcoin, as we know, traditionally has been in a cycle form. What happens? Do you have any clients that are like, what's going on when the price is going down? Do they get concerned? And how do you assuage those fears of people as they're kind of entering the space for the first time?
Yeah, it is certainly an education process, no question. And volatility on the way up is actually not the worst thing in the world. I don't overthink. One of the ways I describe it to people is, if you have a 401k, I'm not personally checking what my 401k or my house price is every day.
Right.
I have this view that they're good assets that go up over time, and they are going to fluctuate, right? But you have to have long-term time horizon. So I think from a store of value, it's one of the things we'll educate business leaders is you need to think about it like that. But we also, again, our role in the industry is less to do that. I'll let Saylor and the other folks that are better at it than me do that.
Sure.
Our role is to really show how it's used. And when we use it, in many of the cases, we insulate people from that. Because if you're doing a company-to-company payment that happens over a half a millisecond, you don't have volatility.
Right.
If you're getting paid in your loyalty points and you're just spending in dollars, your volatility, you think about it less because your points are actually accumulating in value. And so, we're really thoughtful about the way we provide products and services are for use cases and less about this traditional store of value.
Okay, that makes sense. And where do you see this heading? I mean, 10 years from now, is blockchain infrastructure the default B2B finance, or are we still going to be writing checks like we're back in the 90s again? I don't want to go back there.
Oh yeah, for sure it's gone, right? Yeah. Like, software's eating the world. I think Bitcoin blockchain will eat the world. I think two things are happening though that, we want to be mindful of, and it's nuanced, is in TradFi, which is where I spend most of my days, I think the chasm has been crossed around blockchain as a general thing. And many bank CEOs and big companies are now coming to us and asking us to talk about stable coins.
Right.
So that's the part that I think has now entered the lexicon for them.
Yeah.
And so, I think I'm a maxi in my own way, which is I want to build bridges. And so what I will do with them is say, that's a great start. So now you're talking about digital semi-open infrastructure. That's a great start. It helps incrementally improve fintech infrastructure. So maybe it's not just Visa and Mastercard and the Federal Reserve that control it all, but maybe private companies can exchange goods and services. That's a good start. But I have a specific opinion, which is which blockchain is that built on?
Right.
And where are we building the infrastructure to? Is it open? Is it decentralized? Is it Bitcoin? And so we can start having the conversation with where their starting point is now, which is blockchain is almost certainly going to eat all of financial infrastructure, and that is now with both the new regulation, with the new laws, with the executive orders, with policymakers. I think that writing is on the wall for all of the industry and deciders.
Yeah.
But I have a very clear view of which direction I want to see it go, and so we can meet them where they're at and say, now you're cool with blockchain.
Right.
Let's come all the way over the fence on things that are actually on the Bitcoin infrastructure, because it's built for not just 1 billion people on the planet, but for all 8 billion.
Interesting. So kind of breadcrumb them into more a little bit. That makes sense. And from your seat at the table, we're at this very interesting year in Bitcoin's journey. We're seeing obviously number go up like we haven't seen before. We're seeing regulations that are favorable to Bitcoin's purpose, or whatever you want to call it. And we're seeing institutions adopt it. But we're also seeing great products like that you and the team at Pasando are building. What do you think in the next 5 years is going to be the biggest catalyst for further Bitcoin adoption? Is it regulation? Is it institutions? Is it practical use cases for Bitcoin, like the ones you and the team are building? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I know this might trigger people, but like I just don't care about the price.
Yeah.
The way I think about it is, in Silicon Valley and tech, young founders will often like care about what their valuation of their company is.
Right.
Okay. But if you really want to know how the company is doing, what you really care about is its traction. How many customers are using it?
Right.
How is the company growing? Like how many people are using it? Yeah. How often are they using it? So I think about it in the same way with Bitcoin, which is I think less about the price and I think about the adoption a lot. And so as long as the adoption is growing, which it is, it's growing faster than the internet, that's the metric to look at, I think, at the most principal level. So the adoption part. And then I'd say along the adoption curve, like my view is what's happening right now is store value, most people are in agreement that it's meaningful in some way. They think about it as an investment asset. What I would sort of invite people towards is don't just buy Bitcoin, use it, earn it, and make it part of your, I'd say, competitive advantage.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is whether it's use it for payments like with us, or whether it's earn it, like we natively with our employees actually not only earn dollars, but they get to choose how much of their salary goes into Bitcoin.
Nice.
And what happens is really fun. So we use a product called Bitwage, which is a company we partner with. And you actually have a sliding scale. And what you see there is people will start with like, oh, I'm going to try 5% of my salary.
Yeah.
And it's going to move to Bitcoin. And then the other 95 is going to be in fiat. And then over time, you'll actually watch this.
Yeah.
The curve will swing more and more and more and more and more, because they slowly get used to it. So they're not only just buying it, they're earning with it.
Yeah.
And then what I'd say is then use it. So if you're a business leader or you're somebody who works at a company, the way I would describe this is, if you were at the dawn of the internet, when I was the first tech company I was at, was in the late 90s, and I got to see this crazy ride. And you might use the internet, like you might go to back then it was like a catalog and you'd go www, and that was good. And you were probably already farther ahead than your parents or your grandparents who were like, what is this?
Yeah.
But then the people who were within their company or the people who were like, company builders would say, what does this mean for my company?
Right.
And the internet native companies just absolutely ate the old school companies that were brick and mortar companies,
Yeah.
to the point where there really isn't anymore.
No.
And so my invitation is for wherever you're at professionally, if you bring these Bitcoin native kind of concepts into your company will have a competitive advantage because most companies aren't looking there yet, but the ones that are native will win and they will be the ones that last forever.
Yeah, I'm just thinking from like an employee perspective too. That's a really awesome option to have. I take like a third of my income in Bitcoin, and then I see all of a sudden that number may be higher than the other 66% I saw in fiat. Like that's going to orange pill a lot of people out there.
Yeah, you just kind of stop thinking about it. I've been doing that for so long. It just becomes kind of part of your daily life, and you start thinking more natively in sats. And it's fun. Like we have a foundation, Pasando.org, that supports the circular economies down in the global south, and that really is about Bitcoin being used for transactions in the places that don't even have access to the financial infrastructure. And you see they do that.
Yeah.
And so we thought, well, if they do that, couldn't I do it, right?
Yeah.
So whether I'm a software developer in Argentina, getting paid by an American company, Bitwage is great for that. Or if I'm just one of the employees here who just happens to believe in the space, how do I vote for my interest in the space? By using it, right? Vote with our money.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Oh man, I gotta talk to the team about that one. So we're getting close to our time here, Jeremy. But I know you don't care about Bitcoin price, but I want you to humor me for a second. We play a little game here on the show. So are you familiar with The Price is Right? You know The Price is Right, right?
I think so. I think that's a TradFi old school company, game, but we can play it
to sats.
Okay.
But what we do is, this has been a very eventful year in the Bitcoin space, and we ask all of our amazing guests, just for shits and giggles, for fun, not financial advice, what is your prediction for where Bitcoin's price will just be at by December 31st, the end of this year? The bell is about to strike midnight. Where do you think it is? Because the winner of this, Price is Right, so whoever's closest, we're giving a nice Patagonia, Roxom Patagonia to, and hopefully I can put it on your shoulders next time you're here. I know, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a Patagonia. So, Victor, can we bring up the leaderboard? We don't have it? We don't have it right now. That's okay. So I know the leaderboard by heart. So here's what we got. I know the high mark right now is Knut Svanholm, 443. I am on the more conservative end. I think I said about 142 by year's end. Where do you land on that spectrum, even though I know you don't care about the price? That's okay.
Here's what I'll let you do. I'll do an exchange rate, because my business does exchange rate.
Okay, yeah.
So I wonder, not about are we going to get to 500,000 in price, but I wonder, are we going to get to 500 million users?
Oh, okay. And we're at like 300 right now, right? So how long do you
So if we were at 50% increase in users, what would that mean for the price?
You would assume it would at least double, right?
50%, somewhere between 50% and more. Yep.
Okay. All right. Depending on how much they're buying. So you're thinking we're going to be at 500 million users by the end of this year?
I think we'll grow 50% of the user base. I think is possible.
Okay.
And if we grow 50% of the user base, the price will probably grow 50%.
Right, so
50% times $100 and something thousand dollars, 1.5.
Okay, so there we got our answer. All right, we'll have to do the math.
I know.
Later.
So you know why? Why I did that? Because what do they say? Bitcoin is not about trust in people, trust in math.
Right. And one more question I got to ask you. You talked about seeing the world and prices in sats. What do we have to do in America to kind of get people in that line of thinking? That seems like a really difficult challenge to overcome.
Okay, so like the last part, I'll talk a little bit more about, you had Alex, the executive director of pastin.org on recently, and that's really where probably like my deepest heart is. Like, my day job is to talk to bankers and big company CEOs, but my nights and weekends is this, which is like, so we give 10% of our profits back to a 501(c) called pastin.org. And in pastin.org, everything is about catalyzing financial inclusion through the Bitcoin circular economies. We started the whole talk about the United Nations. And our point there is we can create better outcomes than the United Nations, which is access to education, access to technology, access to jobs, access to literacy through Bitcoin. And what I've learned there is when you give somebody, not through philanthropy, but through agency, just a little bit of Bitcoin, they create curiosity. And that curiosity goes, it's money. But the money is on my phone. But then my phone is a self-sovereign, self-custody thing that doesn't have other owners. So then I can exchange it with you, or I can exchange it with some tribe that has no access to banks. And then some American can come by and I could buy crafts from it. And then all of a sudden the circle happens. Okay, so that's happening in these places that are completely left behind. But I'll tell you, it's starting to happen in the US too. So another program, we work with, I think, 40 programs around the globe that we help support these Bitcoin circular economies. One of the ones that I'm most excited about recently is a program called Digital Nest. And this is in America, not far away. Digital Nest takes kids that they came from, migrant farm workers. So near Silicon Valley in California in the border towns, but not part of Silicon Valley, but part of the farm picking. Their children don't have access to the tools you and I did. So they train them with computer centers, access to technology, education, and literacy. We just started training them on Bitcoin circular economies. These kids are the future. And you know what? Their parents might not understand Bitcoin. Your parents might not understand Bitcoin. But these kids are actually talking about what would it look like to be able to pay, buy, and earn in sats. They're the generation to follow.
So it's kind of the tale that we already know, right? It's always education, whatever we can do to educate the youth. And as they grow up, they're going to see all of the use cases that are available currently, and that kind of like you looking forward to the future, what we're going to need for this Bitcoin denominated future that we're hoping to live in. I got to tell you, Jeremy, I don't think I've met anybody on our show who I've seen who has such a great mission, but is really like not just talking about it, but walking and building it for the future. So I really appreciate the time having you on the show today. It was so fun. Pleasure having you, and we hope to see you again real soon. We're going to take a quick break here at the Blockchain Report, but we'll be right back after this. We can skip this. There it is. Okay. Beautiful. All right, we're back with Morgan. Morgan, I want to talk a little bit more, or start talking a little more about your background. You mentioned you got into Bitcoin all the way back in 2013. You started advising on it about in 2016. I mean, that's kind of like spotting Beyonce before Destiny's Child was still a thing. So you kind of had that vision of what was going to make it special. So that makes me wonder, what made you take it seriously when a lot of people on Wall Street were still calling Bitcoin a scam at this point in time, or a Ponzi scheme?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think I had a traditional upbringing like many folks. My parents were Ross Perot voters, so that kind of gives you an idea politically
Oh.
we were leaning. And my parents were very good about explaining things. They were not, they weren't heavy discipliners. They didn't let us do whatever we wanted, but they did sit us down and explain almost everything to us, almost to the point of it being annoying. I remember whenever I got in trouble, I'd have to stand on a certain tile in my parents' kitchen, and then they would just talk me to death. And honestly, it was just not worth doing something bad because it's just like a lecture, you know? But they not only did that as disciplinary, but they also did that with everyday things. And so my dad would sit down about the financial system with me. He talked about what insurance was. He talked about why all the political parties are no good, right? And so these were kind of things that I heard growing up. And so in high school, I got really into Ayn Rand. And then in college, I got very into Austrian economics to the point where it actually made my schoolwork difficult because I had to take like micro and macro and learn Keynesian economics. And I didn't do so well in macro as as a result of that. I mean, I tried my best, but I got into it with the teacher quite often. And it led me into finance. I originally thought I was going to be a doctor because in my family there's a lot of medicine. And I ended up on the floor of the American Stock Exchange getting a bunch of yelling guys who were trading in an options pit coffee. That's how I got started. But from there, I've always been kind of curious and asked a lot of questions. And I switched into wealth management in 2010. And at that time, I was reading the Mises blog very regularly. And so when I read about Bitcoin on their blog, I believe it was in 2011 or 2012, like I took it seriously and I tried to buy some, but I just couldn't quite figure out how to do it as like a single woman in New York, a young single woman in New York at the time. I didn't want to get into trouble and I didn't want to end up in a situation where I was trading, cash for Bitcoin on the street. That seemed very not the right thing to do. And so I just kind of forgot about it. And then when I met my husband and he was just like, Bitcoin all the time, it was hard to like not take it seriously. I feel like I've been so interested in this stuff to begin with. And then also like if I weren't taking it seriously, that would mean that I wasn't taking a lot of what my then boyfriend was saying seriously. And that to me was like, okay, then I should maybe question my relationship. And so I started to get more interested in Bitcoin and learn more about it. And it was actually really podcasts at the time that really helped me along to get me where I was. And then when the validity, though, of having clients starting to ask questions about it, I think really pushed me over because like in the past, I just thought it was, okay, it's just these weird libertarians like me who are interested in this thing and maybe it won't actually ever become something. But when I had a client who she's in fashion, like she's not running in these, bizarre libertarian circles like we were. Like she's just an everyday person and she had questions about Bitcoin. And it's like, oh, okay, like this is not just for the anarcho-capitalist plebes here. This is something that other people are actually interested in. Like, let's talk about it. And we did. And then, shortly after that, I had another client. He's a writer. There's no reason why he would be interested in Bitcoin. He's not like a libertarian. But yeah, no, he had a friend that had suggested it to him and he wanted to know my opinion. Right. And it was like that. It was like every single person that I was talking to in my practice, they're everyday people who have everyday lives with kids and families, and they're doing whatever it is that they want to do. They were hearing about this thing and they were saying that people were telling them that they shouldn't pay attention to it, but they found it interesting. And so they wanted to know my opinion. That to me is it's very telling of what's going on right in the world in general, is that there's some lack of trust in the system that requires trust. And people want to know what they can do to maybe have just something else. And that's kind of how it seemed to me at the time. And then to have somebody validate that, right? As opposed to a financial advisor being like, we don't understand that. You don't understand that. You don't invest in things that you don't understand. That's what Warren Buffett says, right? So like, I think that having a client being like, having legitimate questions, having those questions actually answered, and then me not pushing it, right? Me just being like, if you want to buy some, great, I'll help you. And if you don't, then that's okay too. We just keep talking about it. Whenever you have a question, you just let me know. That's how I've made my practice what it is. When my book came out though in 2020, because I had been running in Bitcoin circles for so long, the way for me to promote my book actually was to go and reach out to all the Bitcoin podcasters that I know and said, hey, I wrote this book. It's about, traditional financial planning, but Bitcoiners need that. And here's why. And maybe you want to have me on your show. Like I'm pro Bitcoin, but I also am pro, having sound finances in general. So like we could talk about that. And I was able to get on a bunch of larger podcasts about like Bitcoin financial planning basically. And from there, Bitcoiners were like, oh, I need that. So now I would say my practice is it's about 50-50. I have like legacy clients who, came in sort of the traditional route, but like half my clients now are just people who are Bitcoiners who had, large Bitcoin positions. They need financial planning. No one will touch it. Which is to my benefit, right? That's actually what I want to work on is like these large Bitcoin positions and help people achieve what they want to achieve financially, and do it in a way where everyone feels good about it.
Well, it certainly sounds like through your book and the way you go about explaining things, you've done a really great job of building that trust with your clients at Origin Wealth Advisors, which makes me wonder, like, what makes Origin different from the average or typical financial planning firm, besides the obvious fact that you won't roll your eyes when someone mentions Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So beyond that as well, I mean, we offer comprehensive financial planning. I don't like to use that term because I don't think that people actually know what that means. But what it literally means is that we act as a client's CFO, like a personal CFO, where they can run any financial decisions be like by us. And in addition to any financial decisions that they have, we also have a huge list of topics that we want clients to go through on a regular basis to make sure that their financial situation is buttoned up in all of the different categories. So for some people, that's just going to be like budgeting, basic budgeting of like what's coming and what's going out. Let's create that net surplus so you can go save in Bitcoin. There's going to be education planning for people. They have young children. They want to make sure that they can either afford private school or send them to some form of a college or technical school, whatever it is later. For some, like we also review insurance. We don't sell insurance, but we like do an insurance review to make sure that our clients are covered. So if there's some sort of situation or incident that comes up, that they don't basically wreck their financial situation. And in the process, we review tax planning, which not a lot of firms do because they don't want to touch it. They always say, talk to your CPA. Again, we're not CPAs, but like, I know like the basics of taxes, and I can read a tax return and so forth, and we can guide clients on how to legally save taxes in a year-over-year basis. We look at retirement planning. Some people want to retire early. Some people want to retire when they're 65, but we still want people to look at what the numbers are so that they can make a reasonable decision about what makes sense for them and their family. And then lastly, we look at estate planning. So some firms will just make sure that you have basic documents on file. We actually review those documents and we make recommendations, and then we send them to an estate attorney. That way, when you walk in with the estate attorney, you're not like, what do I need? And then the estate attorney can just like list all these trusts that they think that you should buy. We have like clients go in there and they're very poignant about what it is that they need and what it is that we've told them to do. And then with all of that, we weave Bitcoin through. So in estate planning, right, there's also multi-sig and making sure that there's inheritance protocols for people's Bitcoin. With tax planning, it's like, where are we holding the Bitcoin? How are we allocated it? Is it something that we want to hold in a retirement account or in a personal account? And making sure that we're doing it in a tax efficient manner. Retirement planning too, it looks really different, I would say, with Bitcoin versus with traditional assets. So we're planning for that in a different way, like how we're taking withdrawals or what we're looking at as far as capital gains tax and so forth, if somebody's going to sell in order to fund a lifestyle. So there's a lot of different aspects of it that now have a layer of Bitcoin on top of it. And so I would say that that's what really makes us different, is not only are we doing that planning, but now we're weaving Bitcoin into it. It's not just something that's in the investment allocation. And I didn't mention investments, but obviously like that's what we do because we're financial planners. We do manage clients' assets as well. And so I would say that that's like bare minimum of what practices have to do to be a financial advisor, is that you have to manage assets. Not only do we manage assets, but we offer all of these services on top of it.
Amazing. And specifically kind of reining things back into Bitcoin, it's still a relatively new part of the financial ecosystem. So from your seat, I wonder, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you're seeing Bitcoin families make when it comes to planning their financial lives right now? Because we're still kind of treading in some relatively new waters here.
Yeah, so Bitcoiners tend to be in extremes in general. I think that's how we ended up with a lot of Bitcoin, right? Is that like in that bell curve or so forth, you've got people really far in either direction. In finance, that's like people who spend quite a lot or don't spend enough, right? And so I've got like those who are just 100% prioritizing Bitcoin over everything else, and they're oversaving actually. And while some people think, oh gosh, what a hard problem, be oversaving, it actually can be, right? It can be if you've got a family and you have needs and so forth, and like you're having trouble actually spending on the things that you need on a day-to-day basis. So we've got some of those folks. And then we have other folks who are like, well, Bitcoin's going to go to 2 million, by the end of next year. So like, why are we doing any of this budgeting? And the reality is that we're not there yet, and we have to live in the financial reality that we're in. And so we still need to make sure that we're not overspending now, right? Because if you overspend now and you sell all your Bitcoin, right, and then when Bitcoin does eventually go to $2 million, which I'm sure that it will do, I just don't know when, you might not have what you originally were going to have to make your lifestyle be what it is that you want to be in the future. So that's what I'm seeing as a major mistakes. Other mistakes I'm seeing is just Bitcoin storage. For instance, like we've got Bitcoiners who are really hardcore, but maybe they didn't involve like their spouse so much in how they're storing it. I'm not saying the spouse isn't on board, right? In a lot of these situations, the spouse is on board, but they just feel really, really uncomfortable with the hardware wallet setup and so forth. So it's really important to not only like have buy-in from your spouse, but also teach them how to use these things, because if something does happen to you at the end of the day, like if your wife can't access it, then what have we done all of this for? So it's just making sure that like what I recommend to people is like a Bitcoin date night where you literally just send like, $20 around and until you're out from transaction fees, and that way everyone's practicing. You should do that every 6 months or so. And that way people know how to use these wallets and so forth, right? They change over time, so hopefully things will get easier for people. But right now we're still in a stage where, practice does make perfect. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're introducing people to Bitcoin for the first time, I'm sure you've orange pilled your fair share in your day. What do you find is usually their aha moment when they realize that they want to make Bitcoin part of their financial plan?
Yeah, so it's what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And I think that it's more obvious now than it's ever been, right? And after people have experienced massive inflation and there's a lot less trust in the system, it's really obvious to explain to people why they would want to have a money where no, you don't need to trust anybody. You can actually verify it yourself. And for a lot of people, like don't trust verified doesn't really make sense because they don't read, code and so forth. And so using that as an argument, maybe prior to massive inflation that we've had after COVID and so forth, and all the other things that have happened in the last 5 years, I don't know if it was necessarily as relevant. I think that it was still what we were trying to do from the beginning, but now people get it immediately. When people hear that this is something that's outside of the system, they're excited about it, even if they're not necessarily that, that anarcho-capitalist libertarian that I was mentioning earlier, right? It's something that makes sense because they saw their price of eggs double. They see that their grocery bill has doubled. They see that going out to dinner now, no matter what they do, is very expensive, even if they're just ordering pizza. Like all of these things are, people have seen their budgets explode and they don't understand what's going on. And so you don't necessarily need to know that there's some sort of sinister Federal Reserve or whatever it is operating in the background. But people do see that there are problems with prices. And so that to me, I think is the biggest way to get people involved is just to show them what the problem is and show them how Bitcoin can be a solution to it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you have this really great background as an educator. I mean, you have got podcasts, you write books, you do workshops. How does your background in being an educator feed back into the way that you actually serve your clients one-on-one?
Yeah, I love that. I find it's like, it's a double-edged sword. So like my clients help me be an educator, and then being an educator helps my clients. It's like this little nice feedback loop, circular economy, I guess, so to speak. Yeah, because I learn from my clients' everyday situations, right? And I get to hear about things that I maybe otherwise wouldn't have, and then get to problem solve about it. So one of the things I like about my work is that it puts me in a place where I'm not always doing the same thing every single day, right? Obviously, there's some monotony to every single job, but every now and then, like we get a really new situation. We have to think about very critically, okay, like what are the current financial tools that are out there that can help this specific problem that maybe haven't been used for those before. And so that's really exciting. And then when we can apply it to a specific situation, now all of a sudden I have an education that I can provide to other people because we've now done it practically, right? And now I'm educating people, okay, this is what we need to be doing because we've seen this specific situation before. And then people have questions about it. And then when I get questions from people, then I'm actually able to further apply that to my client work. So I think if anything, also educating in general kind of solidifies the information and keeps it like tip of tongue rather than it being like a constant need to look things up. Just give me a minute here. I'm going to look that up for you, right? Rather than just being able to roll off the tongue and give people advice on the spot. And I think people have a lot more confidence in somebody who can, mostly tell them from the get-go, like what they need. And then obviously, like if I don't know something, I tell them I don't know. I don't want people to like be operating on faulty information, but it does help to be able to converse fluidly about it.
No, absolutely. And you've done a really great job of breaking down all these things today, so I can understand why you're so good at what you do. And when I was checking out your website, I saw something that was interesting. you chose to go fee only from day one. And so it makes me wonder, like, why was it important to you to not be another advisor who sells random products on commission and to go this other route instead?
Yeah, so maybe this is going to be out there for people, but for those of you who are religious, like I answer to God. Integrity is the most important thing to me. If I have conflicts of interest in my practice where I'm more likely to sell a product or do something to get more money in, then I think that that's a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that I would do that all the time, but I don't even want that to be there. So what I've tried to do in my practice is just minimize conflicts of interest almost entirely. We've gotten to the point where we really don't have any conflicts of interest in a practice. I bill based on net worth rather than assets under management because that takes away the conflict of me trying to get people to move assets to my firm so I can get paid more rather than just looking at a total financial situation. I don't sell client products to anybody about anything. We just sell advice and keeping it simple so that people just have one fee and they don't get nickel and dimed for all sorts of things along the way, right? It's not going to be for everybody. Some people are going to say the fee's too high and they're not going to come in. And for other people, they like that. They like that, okay, I know she's never going to charge me more than this. She tells me every year, this is what my fee is. And everybody is aligned in that respect. And then I feel good at night. At the end of the day, my integrity is one of the most important things. I'm not going to like put that on the line for additional money. I'm just not going to do it. And I answer to God. And so I feel that it's important that I maintain that relationship as well and that I do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. And I think that more financial advisors should operate that way rather than trying to just get more money in. At the end of the day, right, the game is a long-term game, just like we've been talking about with Bitcoin. I want my firm to last forever. I want my firm to have a good name. I want people to think of me that I'm somebody who's trustworthy rather than somebody who's just, in for a quick buck or a scam.
I love that. I mean, a financial advisor with integrity, with a forward-thinking look on the monetary system. I got a feeling you've made a lot of new fans in our audience today, Morgan. So before we let you go today, between your book, your company origin, yourself as with your hot takes on X, what are the best places our audience can go to get more information about you and everything that you're doing over at Origin?
Yeah, that's a great question, excuse me. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Morgan, X, sorry. You can find me on X. I'm at Morgan with an E, Rochard. My husband and I have a podcast that's called Bitcoin for Advisors. We've been slackers lately, but we do intend to get at least another episode or two out before the end of the year. I have two businesses. Origin Wealth Advisors is originwa.com. That's my financial planning practice. If you just need some Bitcoin consulting, you can find me at moneyowners.com. And I'm currently working on a book that's specifically geared to Bitcoiners who want to do more with their personal finances. It won't be anything like any other TradFi financial planning book out there. About halfway through now. If you want to get an email about it when it comes out, you can find it at bitcoinpersonalfinancebook.com.
Amazing. And you had your other book that's already on Amazon that I checked out and has rave reviews. What's the title of that again so our audience can go check it out themselves?
I'm the worst at promoting myself. Goodness. So that is the Personal Finance Quick Start Guide, and you can find that on Amazon. All the data is from 2020, and I'm not looking to update it, but all of the financial planning principles are timeless. And so while the tax planning might not be as relevant, you'll have to look up your brackets. Everything else should be fairly timeless and good. There is a tiny little Bitcoin section in there because my publisher wasn't as keen on Bitcoin back then when we were writing it, when I was writing in 2019. But it's okay. You can still find all sorts of good Bitcoin information out there, even if it's not in that book.
Yeah, well, people should definitely check that out. I checked it out myself. It has like 4.7 stars, already 100 reviews, so it's got to be some pretty good stuff in there. Morgan, I want to say this interview has been pretty great stuff from you. We thank you so much for joining us in the Blockchain Report today. We hope to have you back real soon, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Hank. It's really nice to be on.
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
All right, welcome back to the Blockchain Report, and we got a special treat with our second deep dive of the day
and our next guest has been described as the gold standard when it comes to Bitcoin wealth services, except he'd probably tell you gold is the wrong standard altogether. He's helped high net worth investors move billions into Bitcoin, built the premier private wealth platform at Swan, and now he's steering investor relations at Nakamoto, a company with ambitions to become the Bitcoin Treasury powerhouse on Wall Street. He's been quoted in Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, and CNBC, but today he's making his real career highlight appearing here with us on the Blockchain Report. Please give a big welcome to Stephen Lubka, everybody. Welcome to the show, Stephen. It's great to have you. Me and my audience are super pumped. How are you this morning?
I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here. Glad to finally come on. I've seen a lot of what you guys have done and talked with some of the team. I'm just excited to be here and chat today.
Yeah, and so are we. We've got a lot to go over this morning. First, I would love to just talk about your background. I mean, you've built a really interesting career at the intersection of Bitcoin, macroeconomics, and wealth management. What was the path that led you from traditional finance to going all in on Bitcoin? What was that like?
Yeah, so I really built my career in Bitcoin. So I've been in the industry for extremely long time, or well, no, not as, I mean, eight years or so, not as long as some people, but my career has mostly taken place within Bitcoin rather than traditional finance. But my work has always existed at the intersection of those two things. So, you're right in terms of that. And so I led private wealth for Swan, and the key insight there for what we built is that most of the capital in America, most of the money is held by people that they're used to the financial advisor model. They're used to the private bank model. They are not used to setting up an exchange account and doing their own two-factor authentication and figuring out all of this stuff on their own. So we built a kind of a concierge wealth platform that was more aligned with what high net worth investors in the US I think are used to, which is like you pick up the phone, you call somebody, you work with them for your asset management. And so I did that for 4.5, 5 years. It was an amazing experience. Like you said in the intro, we allocated some 4.5 billion into Bitcoin through that service. And more recently, I joined Nakamoto to lead investor relations and work in the treasury sphere, which has been amazing experience.
Yeah, I mean, you're really at the epicenter of what's been probably the biggest narrative during this most recent Bitcoin cycle. And that, of course, is the whole Bitcoin Treasury company play that we've been seeing. Now, for those who don't live on Bitcoin Twitter like the rest of us, what does that actually mean in practice? Could you break that down for us?
Yeah, so the treasury company idea emerged, obviously MicroStrategy was the first one, and there was kind of a long period of kind of proving out that thesis. But I would say that the underpinning insight to treasury companies is that a public company has access to financial offerings and vehicles that individual investors cannot access. They can issue convertible debt, they can sell equity, they can get long-term debt that doesn't have a kind of a margin call clause like so much lending does in the Bitcoin space. And so they have more favorable and more advantageous financial vehicles that they can use to acquire Bitcoin. And so the basic insight is that a publicly traded acquisition vehicle has a lower cost of capital and can do things that a non-publicly traded vehicle cannot. And that's the treasury company model, effectively, that there is value to being publicly listed. And then Nakamoto takes that a step further in the sense that we're saying, also, you need to go directly into international markets. You need to, there's all of these distinct capital markets around the world. Most of them don't have a treasury company. Most of them would benefit from having one.
Got it. And Nakamoto, you guys just had some pretty big news that's come out recently as he just pulled off a major merger with KindlyMD and secured over $700 million in financing, one of the largest pipe deals ever for a crypto company. Why do you think capital markets are suddenly warming up to this Bitcoin Treasury play?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's twofold, or there's a few elements here. One is I'm obviously the success of MicroStrategy and just the financial opportunity, I think, for a lot of, these firms in traditional finance, right? Like they see the growth and they want to participate. That's a, just an honest answer. But the other is, I think we're at this moment where Bitcoin is transitioning into an institutional asset class, right? You had the enormous success of the ETFs, and so some 90 billion plus. And you've had this kind of gradual transition, I think mainly curated by the ETFs and the Trump administration, the regulatory environment changing. Not to say there obviously wasn't a large buildup, right? Like of years of work being put into infrastructure. But I think those two elements, the regulatory clarity and the success of the ETFs, has tipped Bitcoin over where capital markets are now asking the question, like, how much exposure do we want to this asset? Like, what does our Bitcoin position look like? What do we need to do to be able to buy it? And one of the things you notice in a lot of sovereign wealth funds, very regulated hedge funds, and other institutional investors is they own MicroStrategy or they own MetaPlanet. And so you have to ask the question, why didn't they buy the ETF? Why are they deploying? Why is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, the Norwegian fund, buying so much MicroStrategy? Why not the ETF? And the answer is that having a corporate wrapper, having a corporate equity is a better fit for most people's investment mandate. It's a better fit for a lot of capital in the world. So you unlock new capital when you basically package Bitcoin in the form of a corporate equity. And then that doesn't even include that. And then you deliver growth on top of it. Like that concept is more native to, I think, a lot of people in finance. And I've seen this in my conversations with analysts at the investment banks in the US. So as part of my job for Nakamoto, I'm talking with these investment banks very frequently. And treasury companies, I think, make more sense to them than Bitcoin has. Bitcoin is complicated because there's no cash flows, you can't model it, it doesn't have a traditional growth rate. And so I think it's confused them for a while because you basically be like, hey, I mean, we think this thing is going to go up, but there's absolutely no way to model it or value it. Treasury companies kind of come back more into that traditional structure where there's a lot that I think analysts can do with these. And so I think they get it more, and it's a better fit for a lot of entities in capital markets.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You get a lot of the benefits of Bitcoin, but with a traditional wrapper, which seemingly makes it a lot easier for people to dip their toe into the orange water. So I definitely get that. And when I was doing my due diligences before we knew we had you on the show, I saw that you've said before that Bitcoin Treasury companies could become a primary vehicle for global capital to gain exposure to Bitcoin, kind of like we just spoke of. So that begs the question, how big do you think this sector could realistically get?
Yeah, so I think if the Bitcoin Treasury thesis is successful, that there is market demand for corporate structures that not only accumulate Bitcoin on their balance sheet, but I think eventually transition to operating businesses and Bitcoin financial institutions, right? So in my view, what the Treasury company is, it is the capitalization phase of future Bitcoin financial services, Bitcoin investment banks, and so on. And so I think if the thesis is correct and Bitcoin becomes a multi-trillion dollar, I mean, it already is a multi-trillion dollar asset, but goes up another 10x or 20x, the market will demand Bitcoin native financial institutions. It will demand financial institutions that understand the asset, that touch the asset, that have expertise in the asset, because that asset needs to be integrated into both securities markets, into banking infrastructure, into economic infrastructure. And the simple truth is most of the banks don't have the DNA and don't plan to, in any sort of short time frame, touch the asset. And so I think like many other trends in history, what ends up happening is that there are new players that come on the stage that build around the new phenomena And those are the providers that succeed there. It's kind of like the mutual funds didn't launch the ETFs, right? Like the ETF providers were new companies that came in and did the ETF. It's rarely the incumbent that innovates, that captures the new terrain. And so I think we're seeing this capitalization phase for Bitcoin Treasury companies in the sense that like you'll get some number of them that transition into these financial institutions. And then, you're looking at probably market caps in this end stage in the hundreds of billions or, maybe some that even reach the trillions of dollars. I think these become major financial institutions if the Bitcoin thesis plays out. Obviously, I'm a bull on that. And I think Bitcoin is going to become a key capital asset. But if that happens, the companies that have the large treasury and also provide services there are home runs.
When you talk about the Bitcoin thesis playing out, do you see that as Bitcoin being mainly used as a store of value, akin to gold, as digital gold, or do you see it also becoming more of a medium of exchange, kind of like Jack Dorsey has banged the drum about a couple of times, saying Bitcoin will only kind of fulfill its destiny once we're starting to use it, for peer-to-peer payments more frequently? Do you think it needs to be both of those, or can it become what you think it will become and, fulfill that thesis as solely a, store of value?
Bitcoin can absolutely be extremely successful only as a store of value. I think that much is clear. There is a key role it could play internationally and in the financial system. Look at gold. Gold has a large role. It's the biggest asset in the world. All it is a store of value. So that's certainly a scenario where Bitcoin could end up and would be successful. It is not, I think, fair to say that if it doesn't capture that medium of exchange role, that it fails. Now, that doesn't mean it can't. It doesn't mean it can't be a medium of exchange. That doesn't mean it won't be a medium of exchange. It also doesn't mean that it won't be more valuable if it's also a medium of exchange. So I'm very bullish on both Bitcoin's potential for that and its capacity to benefit, that it would benefit much more from having that function. But I do think the store of value adoption comes first. I think that's earlier, that's more foundational, and I think we have a longer way to go on the medium of exchange component.
Yeah, no, that feels right. I mean, I think right now we're at that point where the tracks to the Bitcoin train are being laid before our very eyes, and before we see it evolve into that next thing, we need those tracks to be in place first. Now, I want to get back to Nakamoto here for a second. In your new role, you oversee investor relations, which, correct me if I'm wrong, basically means you're the translator between hardcore Bitcoin conviction and Wall Street skepticism. What are you finding is the toughest objection you hear from institutions right now that are still apprehensive to dip their toe into the Bitcoin pool, and how do you go about answering it?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a key kind of part of the job. Surprisingly, I have not met that much opposition at this stage. Most people I've spoken with, and I've spoken with quite a number of institutions, they're very excited to get their arms around this now. They're interested. Now, that doesn't mean they're not building conviction and understanding. That is certainly happening, but I wouldn't characterize it as an objection per se. I think it's more of an education process. I think it's more of their kind of building their models and how do they relate to this thing and what role do they see it play. And so, I think in the treasury companies, a lot of what you see is just thinking around MNAV, how to value these things, how to write about these things, and also that long-term goal of where does this end up? Which, like I said, my view is these become operating businesses and financial institutions. But so I think it's like they're making up their minds and composing their thought process on where that ends up. And I think that's the stage that they're at. I think so much of the skepticism was effectively blown out by the ETFs. And I actually, so I had talked to some people that had some conversations I guess I shouldn't say who this was, but executives at a massive financial firm. And they basically said that they were skeptical of the ETFs. They were skeptical of Bitcoin, but then once they saw how Bitcoin performed during the tariff volatility, right? They were sold. They were sold. Like Bitcoin was a better asset to own. And I think the volatility was holding them back a lot. And I think the ETF and the performance post the ETF era has convinced so many people. I think they were struggling before that, but you don't watch BlackRock launch the most successful ETF of all time and then the
Right.
volatility compress on this asset to a very reasonable amount and not, I think, get a little interested.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly seems like all the institutional money and these ETFs that we're seeing have really muted the volatility of Bitcoin's waters, and it's just been kind of more of a slow and steady rise rather than like those parabolic shifts we had seen previously. And with that in mind, I want to talk about Nakamoto's competition, right? We talked about MicroStrategy earlier. We talked about Metaplanet. They're both stacking hard. What makes Nakamoto's treasury approach different from simply buying Bitcoin and then tweeting laser eyes on Twitter? How do you guys go about it?
Yeah, so I think there's a few kind of key differences to what we're doing. One is the team that's behind Nakamoto is a lot of the key team that oversaw UTXO, which was the hedge fund under Bitcoin Inc. that actually was the best performing hedge fund in the world over a 5 or 6 year time frame. It really did amazingly, and at the last time I checked those numbers, and that was done through investing in first movers in international markets. So the UTXO team recognized the opportunity for treasury companies early. Metaplanet was the first investment that they did. So this was the team behind kind of part of the initial Metaplanet idea, as well as Smarter Web, Blockchain Group, and many others that did extremely well. And so the thesis there is that, again, there's a lot of capital trapped in international markets that can't easily buy Bitcoin or American assets. And so if you can launch a quality treasury company that's a first mover that provides an on-ramp for that capital, then it's a very compelling offering. It's a very compelling idea. And Nakamoto, that's part of our key strategy, is we plan to invest a portion of our balance sheet in kind of international treasury companies and playing a key role. And that can take a lot of different forms, but for now, just let's just say that we plan to deploy our balance sheet in that thesis. So that's one thing we're doing that's different. It's very different. We plan to be more engaged and more active. And we also are looking at we have a core thesis on operating businesses, on synergizing with the Bitcoin treasury. So what businesses could you own or operate or acquire that actually create cash flow with the Bitcoin treasury or synergize with it? And that's a question we're very actively asking. So I think we are a team of operators from the Bitcoin industry. We're people that have been in the industry, that have operated Bitcoin businesses for quite a while. And we view Nakamoto kind of as both a direct kind of treasury company and treasury play and an expression of that thesis, but also a way of kind of pulling that all together and kind of synergizing it with where this industry is going to end up.
Interesting. And it sounds like you're still kind of figuring out how to decide which sectors or companies make sense to bring under that umbrella. Like you don't have a formula for that yet. I mean, what you guys are doing is still very new. I don't want to say completely unprecedented, but it is new. So do you have an idea of what qualifies a company to kind of be brought in by you guys?
Yeah, so we're now in the domain of public company regulation. So it's not something we've disclosed to the market, and I can't talk about our criteria there yet.
Sure.
But it is something that obviously we would like to present to the market of how we're thinking about that and what our long-term capital strategy is and how we would evaluate those criteria. It's something we're very actively engaged in. and that we look forward to sharing. So definitely a good question, and definitely something that we're putting thought into. And I think that's, again, it echoes this core point that, like, we want to build Nakamoto as an institution and a business that sits in the Bitcoin industry, that sits in the rise of this asset class and participates in many ways.
Yeah, I hear that. And, we've seen public market investors get really excited when traditional companies buy even a small amount of Bitcoin to put on their balance books. Do you think markets are ready to value a company primarily on its Bitcoin strategy, or are we just not there yet?
Well, I think they have with these companies in many regards. So I think all of the existing treasury companies are being valued almost entirely off their Bitcoin treasury and operations. But now, how does the market feel about doing that? I think many people are deeply conflicted. And you get to this very interesting thing where in public markets, the focus is on your income statement, on your cash flow, and all valuation calculation is effectively downstream of the growth of your revenue and the growth of your income statement. Current valuation models do not effectively, like, they really don't value balance sheet. They don't put a lot of value on, like, how robust is the balance sheet of this company. That balance sheet is certainly not getting a multiple or factoring in key ways. It might be kind of included at par. And so I think there's kind of this interesting question that treasury companies raise: is that the right approach? Is that how we should value the balance sheet? What about companies that have a better balance sheet, that have proven that they have a better balance sheet over years, that are putting in effort, operations, and strategy to stewarding, growing, and capitalizing on the highest quality balance sheet possible, right? Like, if you are delivering enterprise value by being a much more sophisticated balance sheet manager than another company that's just sticking $1 trillion in T-bills, is that worth something besides the net present value? You could argue that you are providing value growth there. I mean, you are growing the value of the business. Somebody who invests their balance sheet that grows 20% a year is worth more than someone who grows their balance sheet 1% a year. I think disagreeing with that statement means you're putting orthodoxy ahead of substance, meaning, like, this is just something. And a lot of people on Wall Street would disagree with that statement because it doesn't fit the contemporary valuation models. But I think it's flawed because, value is value. And I don't really care where a business is making growing their value from, as long as they're doing it consistently and well. Like, at the end of the day, if you want to give me a stock that goes up 50% a year from balance sheet operations versus from revenue growth, like, I don't care, as long as you can do that consistently. The pushback would be like, well, maybe it's more fragile, or, like, markets go up and down, balance sheet operations are different, but economies go up and down too, and, like, revenues contract all the time, and, like, products contract. So I don't think the market's there on this topic yet, but I think it is an interesting topic, that it's a question that's being posed by these businesses, is like, how do we value a balance sheet versus an income statement? And I honestly think, like, at this moment in capital markets, with the debt situation where it is, with fiscal spending where it is, and also with, like, potential AI disruption in a sense. What I mean there, I don't mean to use that as a buzzword, but I mean to say, if we do actually get a scenario where there's a high level of disruption of many businesses because of AI, we could argue if that's going to happen or not. I think there's something kind of unique in Bitcoin as an asset in that scenario, and kind of having this store of value asset on your balance sheet that would benefit from net total growth without being vulnerable to sector by sector disruption. So that was a lot of things, but I mean, those are some of my thoughts there.
No, I understand. I appreciate detailing that take for you. But you mentioned the word value a couple of times, which I'm glad you did, because critics will often say that Bitcoin companies are too dependent on price action. So my question would be, how does Nakamoto plan to prove its value in sideways or bearish markets?
Yeah. So I think for a treasury company, your value is the value you add via your operations and strategy, right? So it comes down to what are the actions you're taking that are specifically accretive or that specifically deliver value for shareholders, right? And if you have cash flow that you can deploy in a bear market, if you have better financing terms, if you have capital partners that are willing to lend you money in a bear market, if you have an investment strategy for the balance sheet that outperforms, kind of the market or Bitcoin or what have you. These are all ways that, like, through your operations and through what the team is actually doing, you deliver more value. And I think, like, that's how these companies should be looked at. It is not, there is more to this than just say you're putting Bitcoin on your balance sheet and start selling equity. And that's certainly going to be where the market ends up, is that it's not enough to just do that. And you can see it, like, diverging performances, diverging MNAVs across constellations of treasury companies. Like, it does matter what you're doing. And that is where the value is derived from. It's derived from strategy, operations, and execution. I like to think of it as, like, treasury companies are similar to the miners in many ways. Miners identify pockets of cheap energy where they can arbitrage the value, the price of the energy, to effectively buy Bitcoin for less, right? Like, they're buying it through the mining process, obviously, but they're looking for cheap energy and they're turning cheap energy into Bitcoin. Treasury companies are doing a similar thing where they're looking for cheap capital and turning capital into Bitcoin. And so it's a similar model. And just like all miners don't have the same energy price and don't operate the same, all treasury companies don't have the same strategy or the same cost of capital.
Mm-hmm. That was very well put. Thank you for breaking that down. I know your time is limited here, so one more question. We'll get you out of here. So, Stephen, if you and I were talking again in 5 years' time, what do you hope people will say about Nakamoto? That it built the first Bitcoin native conglomerate, that it brought trillions into the ecosystem, or simply that it orange-pilled Wall Street suits one portfolio at a time? Or maybe something else? What are your thoughts?
All three sounds great. Be very happy with all three. We want to build a long-term Bitcoin financial institution. I think this is the vision of the team, and I think it's a good one. That, like, we do not currently have many Bitcoin financial institutions, and they're certainly not integrated at scale into the hundreds of trillions of dollars of the financial and asset landscape, right? Like, this is a big world with a lot of value in it. And Bitcoin is a very small percentage of that. And Bitcoin financial institutions, even less so. So, we want to build Nakamoto as a business that engages with an evolving landscape, a rapidly evolving landscape for Bitcoin, to build a Bitcoin financial institution that lasts. And so obviously that looks like responding to and capitalizing on market conditions as they arise, which will change over time. And there will be different opportunities. And it's one reason, like, we're definitely, we value being active and being engaged here, and also just leveraging decades of experience across the team collectively in the Bitcoin industry. And, I think a key position in those networks and, interface with both traditional finance, the political landscape, and so on.
Yeah, and it seems like you guys have very smartly positioned yourself in a place to do so, and we're super excited to see what you and the team at Nakamoto will be drumming up next. I certainly, before we go, I know there's probably a lot of people in our audience that are very interested in learning more about what you're doing over at Nakamoto and where they can find more takes from yourself. So is there a good Twitter handle they can follow you on? Where's the best place for them to go and learn more about you and Nakamoto?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very active on Twitter, very responsive to comments. DMs are open. So just my name, Steven Lupka on Twitter. Check it out if you want to reach me. Also the Nakamoto handle, just at Nakamoto. Follow us on there for any key corporate updates and, and what have you. So we push all kind of major updates through there. And yeah, if you want to get in touch directly, I'm the right guy. I lead investor relations, and just reach out on Twitter. That's easy.
Amazing. And last question I almost forgot to ask you, Steven. By the end of this year, 2025, we're keeping track of all of our guests, what they think their price prediction will be for Bitcoin by the end of this year. We're going to give a free Roxom Patagonia vest to the winner.
Okay.
What is your number? We have 200,001 and 175 are the most recent guests. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to give kind of a twofold answer. I think it's probably between 150 and 170, but I think it goes higher in 2026. I do not think the top is in this year. So I think we end the year in the mid to upper 100K zone. If I had to pick something, let's say 160. But that's not the top, and we've set new highs in 2026.
Love to hear it. 160 is not the top, but we got more good stuff on the way. Steven, thank you so much for your time today. It was an absolute blast having you. We hope to have you back again in the near future. And yeah, it was great. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thanks for joining us. It's been fun.
Pleasure to be here, man. Great to meet you. Great to come on. See you guys.
Fight of the century. And of course, we're talking about Bitcoin versus gold. The question, will Bitcoin replace gold by 2030? Now, if it does, one Bitcoin would be worth around $1.15 million. Now, this isn't wild speculation either. This, my friends, is math. You see, gold's total value is around $20 to $22 trillion. There's about 19.91 million Bitcoin all around. Divide, and you get about 1 million to 1.1 million per Bitcoin. That's 1.15 million. That figure is what happens if Bitcoin completely takes gold's market. Now, even grabbing half of gold's market would put Bitcoin over $500,000 per coin. 10% gets you past 100K. So what makes Bitcoin the challenger here? Well, of course, it's the scarcity element of it, right? Gold is rare, but nobody actually knows how rare. We dig up about 1% to 2% more gold every single year. And if someone, invents a better shovel, that number changes. If we go on one of those asteroids that has like $4 trillion of gold and start mining it there, that number changes. Bitcoin, meanwhile, is programmed scarcity. 21 million coins, locked forever, supply cuts in half every single 4 years, and predictable, unchangeable, no surprises, right? We love that about Bitcoin. Then there's the control aspect, right? Gold sits in vaults, banks, and institutions that governments can influence. Bitcoin has no central authority, no bank, no government that can stop it. Transactions are public, they're transparent, and censorship resistant. Moving value? Try sending a fortune in gold bars across borders. It's a hassle. It's slow, expensive, and frankly, very risky. Bitcoin, though, takes minutes, an internet connection, and you're done. Authenticity? Gold requires experts, tools, and trust. Bitcoin? Every coin is verified on the blockchain. It's counterfeit proof. Now, critics love to point out Bitcoin's volatility. Historically, they're right. Gold's stability made it the safe haven king. But that is all changing. In Q1 of 2025, Bitcoin's volatility was 52% compared to gold's 15%. By August, Bitcoin's volatility dropped to 45%, while gold was at 12%. Still higher, but the narrowest gap ever. Why? Well, the big money, as we just talked about with Piotr. Institutional investors and Bitcoin ETFs entered the space in 2024, smoothing out price swings. Clearer regulation is also calming the nerves of people out there. Bitcoin is growing up. It won't be as stable as gold by 2030, but it certainly seems to be trending that way. Meanwhile, institutional adoption is exploding. BlackRock, Fidelity, and other titans brought in spot ETFs. Corporate treasuries are filling with Bitcoin. Strategy Inc. alone holds like 632,000 BTC. Public companies with Bitcoin nearly doubled in the first half of 2025. Even pension funds are in. Wisconsin, Michigan, and UK funds bought Bitcoin ETFs. Cal STRS, the third largest US pension fund, now has $133 million in exposure through Strategy. But central banks, they're still hoarding gold. They bought a record 1,000 tons in 2024. A 2025 survey, in fact, found not a single central bank holds Bitcoin. 93% said they have no plans to start, citing volatility and security concerns. Younger investors, though, are all in on BTC. A DeVere Group poll found 73% of investors aged 24 to 45 would pick Bitcoin over the long haul against gold. Another 2025 poll found 16% of Gen Z and 13% of millennials save in crypto long term, compared to only 12% of boomers sticking with gold. Regulation here, though, is the big wild card. The EU is rolling out MiCA. The US and UK are inching toward clarity. Fair rules, you see, help Bitcoin grow. Bad rules, though, could slow it down. And unlike gold, Bitcoin faces digital risks. The whole quantum problem, for instance, 51% attacks and software bugs. Developers are already working on defenses, but the risks do exist. So will Bitcoin eat gold's entire market? Maybe not. Gold has a history. Bitcoin, though, has code. Gold is the legacy safe haven. Bitcoin is the digital hedge. But even a partial shift puts Bitcoin's price in 6 figures, and a full takeover puts us in 7. All right, bringing back Piotr. Piotr! Analysts say if Bitcoin eats gold's $20 to $22 trillion market cap, we're talking $1 million per coin. Do you buy that math, or is it more of a great headline for gold versus Bitcoin in the great debate?
Yeah, so I recall there was this famous quote by JP Morgan, who said that gold is money, everything else is credit. And the reason why he said that was because, everything else except things like gold, they are scarce. We basically can produce more of and will produce more of. So let's say a silver or like any commodity, anything basically which raises in price, we'll basically make sure that we'll produce more of, so that price will go down eventually, right? And gold in that regard is great because it only has this 1 or 2% inflation rate. So it's basically the supply is increasing at 1 or 2% per year, because that's our mining rate, right? But as you said, if we find the unexpected reserves in South Africa or wherever of gold, all of a sudden we'll be able to mine this gold and we'll increase the stock. So that stock to flow ratio will change, right? And that basically would mean that gold would become a less scarce asset. And obviously gold was the best idea up till 19th century. I mean, we, as a humanity, we didn't have better idea of something scarce than gold. So that was the very good idea. But now if you compare this to Bitcoin, which we already know that has lower inflation rate and supply rate than gold. And not only that, but it also has fully capped, not changeable limit on how many Bitcoins we'll ever have in circulation. Then this all of a sudden is a perfect scarcity that we haven't encountered anytime before, And that's why people don't have good intuitions in general around how Bitcoin price will behave, because we never have an asset like this before, right? With a 21 million cap that cannot be changed and won't be changed, right? I remember there, if you look at the history also, like the amount of gold in circulation changed, right? At some point, there was when Columbus was, discovering America, and they conquered, the Aztecs and all the Indians, and then they took all their gold, right? And they took that gold and they shipped it over the ocean to Europe, which led to the price increases of everything all across the board. Why? Because all of a sudden we have had those additional gold coming from America to Europe. And in the same way, as you said, like if we found the gold on an asteroid or whatever, and we could mine it, we can improve that technology, we could mine it, then all of a sudden we would flood the market, the value of gold would go down. Now, having said that, if you look at the performance of the gold, since, I don't know, 60s, it was, or Nixon shock, right, in 71, when the coupling of gold happened, gold was only up and to the right. Obviously, there were ups and downs along the way, but back in 71, what was it? Like Nixon was promising like $30 around that rate, like around $30 per ounce. Now gold is around 2,000 or even more than that, right? 2,400.
Yeah,
per
I
ounce.
think
So
I think it's like 30, 35. It's up there.
or even higher. Yeah. So even higher. So
Yeah.
that shows you how much more US dollars, how many more US dollars are in circulation that we printed out of thin air and introduced into the circulation. And all of that excessive liquidity always ends up in the hard and the most scarce assets out there, meaning Bitcoin and real estate, right? I think one eye-opening realization was also when we looked at the S&P 500 returns, but not in USD terms, but in gold terms, denominated versus gold. And if you look at that, because conventional wisdom is like, oh, the S&P 500 moves up, right? Like 7 to 10% per year. There are obviously like some years when it crashes, but then it recovers, and basically economy is going up. And if you denominate in US dollars, then obviously you see this trend. But if you switch to gold standard and you see in gold terms, it's shocking, it's eye-opening, because you actually realize that we are on the level of a late 60s. So 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 in many cases it would be better to keep and hold gold for a long time rather than invest in stock market. Now, bringing Bitcoin to this picture is like Bitcoin currently is 10%, what is it, 12% of the gold market cap. So it's currently we are at around 100K, 110K, whatever. So yeah, I agree with that math. So if you assume that we have to reach the parity, then this would wind up with a price around $1 million per coin. But there is a caveat here, because Bitcoin is obviously, it's not as good as gold, it's 10x better than gold, or like 100x better than gold, obviously, because of those different characteristics, because you can keep it in your brain, having brain wallet, you can keep it in your brain and move, you can move, billions of dollars of Bitcoin all over the world, like in minutes, without asking anyone. And I mean, as a comparison, you can try doing that, like taking gold bars and trying to change the country take your gold bars and try. Let's see how that goes, right? So all of those problems with gold, the gold is cumbersome and it's costly, expensive. You need vaults and guards to help you secure it. And because of all those problems that Bitcoin doesn't have, Bitcoin is at least 10x valuable, if not way more, which means that long-term perspective is, we're not talking even about like $1 million per coin. We're probably talking about 5 to 10 millions per coin, which is funny coincidence, because we also, if you look at early Satoshi writings, we are recently looking at what Satoshi was writing on the early Bitcoin forums. He was already doing those calculations, and he said that if Bitcoin is as successful as he thinks could be, and if it really became part of the global financial system and it really captured that market cap, the price would be around $10 million per coin. And this is what Satoshi has written in one of the early forum posts. So you can see all those pieces. They would sort of suggest that long-term play, and the direction is clear. The only thing is how fast we'll get there, right? Whether it's going to be like 10 years or maybe it's an even longer play, like 30 years. And it's going to be very bumpy road along the way, right? So we are not going to get there in a straight line. It's going to be like up and down, up and down, up and down. And need to withstand that volatility. And, lots of people sell across along the journey, and that's fine too, right? We are, I think the more scarce thing that Bitcoin is only our time. And some people that got in early are cashing out. That's fine, and we'll probably cash out this at some point as well.
No, people talk about the volatility of Bitcoin, but it's really not the volatility of Bitcoin. It's the volatility of human nature, right? And freaking out during price swings and getting those paper hands and then selling, and that's often what causes those price swings. But really, to your point, we're at the very small tip of the iceberg. It's like you only see the little top part of the iceberg, and there's this huge behemoth beneath it, and that's really where we seem to be at with Bitcoin right now. And anyone who takes a second to do any research seems to understand that. But with that being said, we're still seeing central banks loading up on gold instead of Bitcoin. Why do you think a lot of these traditional institutions are stuck in the 20th century and aren't able to get comfortable with Bitcoin as a digital hedge yet? Is it just A fear of the unfamiliar? Is it maybe something else?
Yeah, it's something which you already mentioned. I mean, Bitcoin is still small. I mean, it's still so early. And it's funny if
Yeah.
you look at this because we are already at 100K, 110K. I mean, how can we be early? But yes, we are early. And especially for a traditional institutions, for a big established banks, um, for them, it may be a little bit too risky bet still to accumulate. I mean, if you're a central bank and to start accumulating Bitcoin instead of gold, although we've seen, some countries that are doubling into this and maybe looking how feasible that would be, etc. I would love my own country to have a look at this and start thinking about this. Obviously, I can see that central banks are obviously on the gold spree and they are buying gold and accumulating more and more gold. And guess why? Because obviously gold is money, right? That's a scarce asset that will hold its value, especially given some geopolitical tensions and turbulence in the world that may be coming. So, the gold is a safe haven, and but banks won't do the switch right away. I mean, there will be pioneers. It's a new technology. It's like trying to, convince old established companies that some new technology that is only emerging is they are conservative by default, and that's why they are in the same way they are saying that nobody got fired for buying from IBM. It's like a safe bet in the corporate America. So it's like nobody. You cannot go wrong buying gold. Like if you are in charge in the central bank, you work in the central bank. Guess what? Let's buy some gold, right? It's a proven 5,000
Right.
years idea that worked. And even like look at the price performance of the gold for the last few years. I mean, it's been quite great. I mean, great performance. Gold performed well, and banks that were and countries that were stacking more gold. Obviously, it was a good decision, especially in that post-COVID inflationary environment where the balance sheet of Fed increased so many times over. We printed how much was it? Like 40% of all dollars in circulation. We printed it in 18 months or something like that. So if that happens,
I think it
such
was
an
like
inflationary
25, 30.
environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if that happens, I mean, you need to have a hedge, and gold is natural hedge for that. Now, Bitcoin, obviously, I love for some of those central banks to consider Bitcoin maybe on the side. I mean, obviously, if you look at the countries that own Bitcoin, is US and China. We've all seen Germany selling their Bitcoin, at 50K or something. But yeah, it's the strategic Bitcoin reserve. You have that one as well. Apparently, they are not buying more Bitcoin, but they are at least not selling, which is good. And
Right.
yeah, I think it will take. It's not so in this cycle. It's way too early, but it will take few cycles. Maybe it's this
Yeah.
2030 or something. And I think we'll see the central banks buying Bitcoin as a part of their, maybe not like all in, but having few percent allocated to this. I can definitely see this coming.
Yeah, no, I think they'll be testing the water sooner than later. And I think that something that people are failing to take account for a lot is that, well, a couple things. One, it's that we're in the midst of what could be the greatest wealth transfer of all time, right? As our grandparents and our boomer parents start passing away, God love you, I hope you live forever. But as they do, that money is then going to be transferred to these younger generations. And as we saw in the story, younger investors overwhelmingly prefer Bitcoin over gold. And at that point, for a lot of these people, Bitcoin will have always been a thing during their time on Earth. So it's a lot less unfamiliar and it's a not new thing to you if you've always been exposed to it. So with that being said, do you think that this generational shift all but guarantees that Bitcoin eventually will take gold's crown? Or are we maybe underestimating gold's zombie-like staying power and it'll be here a lot longer than we think?
Yeah, so there is definitely an argument that uh, you know elderly people are not first to change their long-held beliefs and deep convictions, right? And if they saw the gold during their whole their life, and for them Bitcoin is something new and unproven, then obviously only when the generational change will happen. So literally new people with fresh minds, maybe younger, maybe people, as you say, like digital natives that, were using Bitcoin, and for them, Bitcoin is no risk. And they just, like, it's obvious that they hold Bitcoin. Those people will start joining those big institutions and start reforming them from within, or start, sharing new ideas, etc. So this will definitely help. Yeah, because there is an argument that, some people will just will never change their beliefs, old entrenched beliefs. It's like every time a new technology of that caliber comes, whether it was light bulb or whether it was like electricity or computers, there's always like a new generation that sort of takes this technology and brings this to the masses, because that elderly generation is basically still entrenched, and their mindset is not really ready to adopt something new. Now, but Bitcoin use case as a store of value. I mean, even this store of value thing, it's such a tiny market cap now still. Because if you compare it to all the different things that people are using to store their wealth, and it's just only this, like, okay, you have paintings, you have real estate, it's huge. I mean, real estate is totally huge. You have other stuff. I mean, you have watches, like high quality watches. You have all those different things that people are buying just to keep their money, just to invest into something, so that it's not sitting on my checking account with 0.2% interest, whereas price of my groceries is doubling every 2 years or something. So people see that, and they are just looking for anything that would hold on its value. So if people make a switch, a mental like change. Or you can see those people, like, they are living from rentals and they're buying more and more real estate, like whether it's apartments or next houses. Like there's this person is buying yet another house because they just need to park the cash somewhere, and they see lots of hassle with doing that. And then they compare it with Bitcoin, and then they make a switch, and then they cash in and move to Bitcoin. This is the end game, because you don't need real estate. You don't need expensive painting. You don't need expensive car, like whatever. You don't need anything, because Bitcoin solves this fully. And when Bitcoin is captured, this use case fully, that price is way, way, way higher than it's currently. And so one could say we are at 1%, 2% maybe of the total potential addressable market. If people start using Bitcoin for the sort of value fully.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, literally, especially in today's global economy, where we have access to literally everything on the planet thanks to the internet, people are looking to put their money anywhere else but fiat. For instance, I just saw a story about, Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, co-owns a Kobe Bryant Michael Jordan card that's valued at around $13 million. And he was like, yeah, basketball cards are an asset class of their own. So people, now that we have there's 8 billion people in the world, somebody somewhere wants or puts value on so many different things, when the truth of the matter is Bitcoin is meant to hold value. This is what it was kind of built for, right? Was to hold value, so I don't have to put my money in shoes or expensive watches or basketball cards. I could, but why wouldn't I just do it in the thing that's incredibly easy to transfer? I can self-custody myself, and over its entire time period has only gone up and to the right if you scale back. So yeah, to your point, it's a new era of the world that we're ushering into, and old guard is always going to be reluctant to change from what they know. Gold always worked for me, and it always will work for me. And they might be right, but it looks like something has come along that is going to work a little better, and it takes time to make that adjustments, like you said. That's another wrap for another week here at the Blockchain Report. As always, thank you for tuning in, and if you haven't already, do us a favor. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to RoxomTV and yours truly at Hank at RoxomTV on all platforms that people currently are using. You can skip MySpace on this one. We'll be back next week with more crypto chaos and blockchain bedlam right here on the Blockchain Report. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and always make sure to hodl on. See you next week.